The views, comments, and opinions of the following program do not necessarily reflect those of Morris Media Studios, MorrisMediaLive.com, or its affiliates. Listener discretion is advised.
Dean Napier, Mr. Bell, members of the faculty and members of the student body of this great institution of learning, ladies and gentlemen. Now, there are several things that one could talk about before such a large, concerned, and enlightened audience. There are so many problems facing our nation and our world that one could just take off anywhere. But today I would like to talk mainly about the race problem, since I'll have to rush right out and go to New York to talk about Vietnam tomorrow, and I've been talking about it a great deal this week and weeks before that. But I'd like to use as a subject from which to speak this afternoon the other America. And I use this subject because there are literally two Americas. One America is beautiful for a situation. And in a sense, this America is overflowing with the milk of prosperity and the honey of opportunity. This America is the habitat of millions of people who have food and material necessities for their bodies, and culture and education for their minds, and freedom and human dignity for their spirits. In this America, millions of people experience every day the opportunity of having life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness in all of their dimensions. And in this America, millions of young people grow up in the sunlight of opportunity. But tragically and unfortunately, there is another America. And this other America has a daily ugliness about it that constantly transforms the buoyancy of hope into the fatigue of despair. In this America, millions of work-starved men walk the streets daily in search for jobs that do not exist. In this America, millions of people find themselves living in rat-infested, vermin-filled slums. In this America, people are poor by the millions, and they find themselves perishing on a lonely island of poverty in the midst of a vast ocean of material prosperity. In a sense, the greatest tragedy of this other America is what it does to little children. Little children in this other America are forced to grow up with clouds of inferiority forming every day in their little mental skies. And as we look at this other America, we see it as an arena of blasted hopes and shattered dreams. Many people of various backgrounds live in this other America. Some are Mexican Americans, some are Puerto Ricans, some are Indians, some happen to be from other groups. Millions of them are Appalachian whites. Probably the largest group in this other America in proportion to its size in the population is the American Negro. The American Negro finds himself living in a triple ghetto, a ghetto of race, a ghetto of poverty, a ghetto is to deal with this problem of the two Americas. We are seeking to make America one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Now let me say that the struggle for civil rights, or the struggle to make these two Americas one America, is much more difficult today than it was 5 or 10 years ago. For about a decade or maybe 12 years, we struggled all across the South in glorious struggles to get rid of legal, overt segregation and all of the humiliation that surrounded that system of segregation. In a sense, this was a struggle for decency. We could not go to a lunch counter in so many instances and get a hamburger or a cup of coffee. We could not make use of public accommodations. Public transportation was segregated, and often we had to sit in the back, and within transportation within cities, we often had to stand over empty seats because sections were reserved for whites only. We did not have the right to vote in so many areas of the South. And the struggle was to deal with these problems. Now, certainly they were difficult problems. They were humiliating conditions. By the thousands, we protested these conditions. We made it clear that it was ultimately more honorable to accept jail cell experiences than to accept segregation and humiliation. By the thousands, students and adults decided to sit in at segregated lunch counters to protest conditions there. And when they were sitting at those lunch counters, they were in reality standing up for the best in the American dream and seeking to take the whole nation back to those great wells of democracy which were dug deep by the founding fathers in the formulation of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. Many things were gained as a result of these years of struggle. In 1964, the Civil Rights Bill came into being after the Birmingham movement, which did a great deal to subpoena the conscience of a large segment of the nation to appear before the judgment seat of morality on the whole question of civil rights. After the Selma movement in 1965, we were able to get a voting rights bill. Now, all of these things represented strides, but we must see that the struggle today is much more difficult. It's more difficult today because we are struggling now for genuine equality. And it's much easier to integrate a lunch counter than it is to guarantee a livable income and a good, solid job. It's much easier to guarantee the right to vote than it is to guarantee the right to live in sanitary, decent housing conditions. It is much easier to integrate a public park than it is to make genuine, quality, integrated education a reality. And so today we are struggling for something which says we demand genuine equality. It's not merely a struggle against extremist behavior toward Negroes. And I'm convinced that many of the very people who supported us in the struggle in the South are not willing to go all the way now. I came to see this in a very difficult and painful way in Chicago over the last year, where I've lived and worked. Some of the people who came quickly to march with us in Selma and Birmingham were active around Chicago. And I came to see that so many people who supported morally and even financially what we were doing in Birmingham and Selma were really outraged against the extremist behavior of Bull Connor and Jim Clark toward Negroes, rather than believing in genuine equality for Negroes. And I think this is what we've got to see now, and this is what makes the struggle much more difficult. And so as a result of all of this, we see many problems existing today that are growing more difficult. It's something that is often overlooked, but Negroes generally live in worse slums today than 20 or 25 years ago. In the North, schools are more segregated today than they were in 1954 when the Supreme Court's decision on desegregation was rendered. Economically, the Negro is worse off today than he was 15 and 20 years ago. And so the unemployment rate among whites at one time was about the same as the unemployment rate among Negroes. But today the unemployment rate among Negroes is twice that of whites. And the average income of the Negro is today 50% less than whites. And as we look at these problems, we see them growing and developing every day. And we see the fact that the Negro economically is facing a depression in his everyday life that is more staggering than the depression of the 30s. The unemployment rate of the nation as a whole is about 4%. Statistics would say from the Labor Department that among Negroes it's about 8.4%. But these are the persons who are in the labor market, who still go to employment agencies to seek jobs, and so they can be calculated. The statistics can be gotten because they are still somehow in the labor market. But there are hundreds of thousands of Negroes who have given up. They've lost hope. They've come to feel that life is a long and desolate corridor for them with no exit sign. And so they no longer go to look for a job. There are those who would estimate that these persons who are called the discouraged persons would be 6 or 7% in the Negro community. And that means that unemployment among Negroes may well be 16%. And among Negro youth in some of our large urban areas, it goes to 30 and 40%. And so you can see what I mean when I say that in the Negro community, that is a major, tragic, and staggering depression that we face in our everyday lives. Now, the other thing that we've got to come to see now that many of us didn't see too well during the last 10 years, and that is that racism is still alive in American society and much more widespread than we realize. And we must see racism for what it is. It is a myth of the superior and the inferior race. It is the false and tragic notion that one particular group, one particular race is responsible for all of the progress, all of the insights, and the total flow of history. And the theory that another group or another race is totally depraved, innately impure, and innately inferior. And in the final analysis, racism is evil because its ultimate logic is genocide. Hitler was a sick and tragic man who carried racism to its logical conclusion. And he ended up leading a nation to the point of killing about 6 million Jews. And this is the tragedy of racism because its ultimate logic is genocide. If one says that I am not good enough to live next door to him, if one says that I am not good enough to eat at a lunch counter, or to have a good, decent job, or to go to school with him, merely because of my race, he is saying consciously or unconsciously that I do not deserve to exist. To use a philosophical analogy here, racism is not based on some empirical generalization. It is based rather on an ontological affirmation. It is not the assertion that certain people are behind culturally or otherwise because of environmental conditions. It It is the affirmation that the very being of a people is inferior. And this is the great tragedy of it. Now, I say that however unpleasant it is, we must honestly see and admit that racism is still deeply rooted all over America. It's still deeply rooted in the North, and it's still deeply rooted in the South. Now, this leads me to say something about another discussion that we hear a great deal, and that is the so-called white backlash. And I would like to honestly say to you that the white backlash is merely a new name for an old phenomenon. It's not something that just came into being because shouts of black power, or because Negroes engaged in riots in Watts, for instance. The fact is that the state of California voted a fair housing bill out of existence before anybody shouted black power or before anybody rioted in Watts. It may well be that shouts of black power and riots in Watts and the Harlems and the other areas are the consequences of the white backlash rather than the cause of them. What it is necessary to see is that there has never been a single solid, monistic, determined commitment on the part of the vast majority of white Americans. The whole question of civil rights and on the whole question of racial equality. This is something that truth impels all men of goodwill to admit. It is said on the Statue of Liberty that America is the home of exiles.
Do you need fabrics? We have all sorts. Supreme Wax, Kente, Jewel, Obama, Osikani, and many more. Wholesale and retail available. Contact Gold Coast International Imports. In the Inland Empire, call 310-925-2948. In Los Angeles, call 213-344-8594. Looking forward to doing business with you.
Let me tell you something. Uncle Joe, it's raining and the people are so trying to stay around. And I'm afraid it is. Oh, it makes me feel happy. Oh, yeah. Just to know we can start in the rain and sing. And the people are so sweet to stay here.
Oh, it gets sweet.
And I come in on
Yeah.
Let me tell you what I come in on. Oh, yeah! Get the key. Didn't it rain, children? Rain, oh yes. Didn't it? Yes, didn't it? You know it did, didn't it? Oh, oh yes, how it rained. I said it rained, children. Rain, oh yes. Didn't it? Yes, didn't it? You know it did, or didn't it? Oh my Lord, how it rained. You know it rained 40 days, rained 40 nights. To make my garment fit me right. And when I get to heaven, gonna put on my robe, walk around in glory, tell the glad news. Look up David in the heat of the day, tune up a harp and begin to play. I know it rained, you know it rained. Oh, how it rained, rained too long, all night long. Rain, 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 rain. Didn't it rain, children? Rain, oh yes. Didn't it, yes. Didn't it, you know it did, or didn't it? Oh my Lord, how it rained. the Lord, can't you take on more? But no cried out, my friends. The angels got the key and you can't get in. I know it rain, you know it rain. Rain too long, all night long. Rain all day, rain all night. Rain, 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 rain. Rain, 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 rain. Rain, children. Rain, oh yes. Didn't it, yes. Didn't it, you know it did or didn't it? Oh my Lord, how it rains!
You have a power, the power of choice. What are you going to choose? Are you going to choose alcohol over water? Are you going to choose exercise versus sitting down? You have the right of choice. Now let me give you some mental tools to use to transform your health. Number one, stay away from toxic people. Stay away from toxic shows. All these toxic words and energies go directly into your subconscious mind to program you for mediocrity and disease. They lower your energy and your vibration. You should be around people that's full of life, full of happiness, full of joy, full of excitement. But if all your friends have nothing but negative stories to say to you, that depletes your will. Your will must be invigorated with happiness and joy. Look at nature. It rises up to worship God. Look at the grass. It goes upward. Look at the fruits and the vegetables and the tree. They all praise God. Look at the birds. They sing God's praise early in the morning time. And then during the day, they show you that they have faith in God by just flapping their wings and then stopping and letting nature gravitate them toward their objective, the law of gravity. Look at nature. It teaches us. Even now, you can do this. You can look at your dog. When your dog gets sick, it will go in the backyard and eat nothing but grass. The intelligence is inside of the dog, and we as human beings have the same intelligence. Life renders life. See how good you feel by putting nothing but raw foods in your body. Do it for 3 days, then master it. And when you do it for 3 days, that thought of doubt in your head will get stronger. Then do it for 5 days, then the thought will get stronger. Do it for 7 days and the thought gets stronger. Do it for 21 days and then the thought is going to encourage you to go even further. This voice of correction inside of your head is your best friend. It's your catalyst. You can't do better until you know better. Knowledge is a prerequisite of change. At Harmony Herb Company, we're here to provide you with not only the right supplements to take, the right foods to eat, but we give you the spiritual and the mental component that is missing in all of the programs in the world. We show you that missing link to give you the faith, the belief, the determination that you can accomplish anything because you're not alone. We love you. We have empathy for you. We're here to support you. We know that there's greatness inside of you. Listen, every human being is like a mine of gold and silver. And when you go to the earth and you try to break up the earth, and when you go deep down, you'll find rocks that are called blue ground. And it takes a lot of heat, a lot of pressure to break it up. And one little diamond is in there. That's you. I'm speaking to you, the diamond in you. Right now, sitting down, listen to me. Standing up, listening to me. Having that thought that you can't turn it around, you can. You know why? I'm going to help you to see the beauty in you that you couldn't see. I'm going to help you to see the potential in you that you cannot see. I'm going to show you not just a word, but this word that is backed by spirit will download itself to the deepest recesses of your heart and your mind, giving you the energy, the force, the power to get up right now and take action. Life renders life and death renders death. Go to HarmonyHerbCompany.com. I am Aleem and I am at my best, and so are you.
Nobody knows the troubles that I've seen. Nobody knows how I've been hindered along the way. But I can say this, that My God, He really knows. And He's given me these words to sing to you, as well as to me, that He no longer wants anybody, nobody, to hinder me. Sing, girls. My God doesn't want nobody to hinder me. It makes it harder to grow and reach my destiny. He doesn't want me to go outside my boundary line. He lets me know that this world is running out of time. 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 So much is going on around me, till I've been tempted to go astray. But to yield to temptation is not my God's way. He doesn't want me to live a life that ends in vain. My God doesn't want nobody to hinder me. My God doesn't want nobody. It makes it harder to grow and reach my destiny. Please don't hinder me. He doesn't want me to go outside my boundary line. He lets me know that this world is running out of time. Out of time. World is running out of time. Out of time. Out of time. You're looking at a miracle when you look at me. 'Cause with God in my life, I've got the victory. So many times that old devil tried to kill me. Yes, it did. My God wouldn't let him. He stayed his hand from me. So my God doesn't want nobody to hinder me. Nobody to hinder me. It makes it harder to grow and reach my destiny. Oh Lord, He doesn't want me to go outside my boundary line. He lets me know that this world is running out of time. Running out of time. Out of time. Out of time. This world is running out of time. Run, run, run. Out of time. Running out of time. Oh. Out of time. Run, out of time. This world is running out of time. Out of time. Oh. Out of time.
Can I get an amen? Amen. Truly wonderful. Be seated, gentlemen. Friends, I have a very important announcement to make this evening. Since it's not a part of my sermon, I'd appreciate it if you listen. Yes. What's going on, friends, is we've come to that time of the year when I must leave town for a while.
Yes.
Yes. In the words of Ray Charles, I'm going to hit the road, Jack. It's time for what we call my annual pilgrimage to that great and wonderful city, our Mecca, Detroit. Yes, I'm going to Detroit. Can I have an amen for the Mecca of Detroit?
Amen for the Mecca of Detroit.
Now I should be gone for 2 weeks. The last 12 days of which will be spent in Las Vegas, Nevada. Can I get an amen for Las Vegas?
Amen for Las Vegas.
I can tell y'all been there. Now, many of you may ask, why is Reverend Leroy going to Las Vegas? Probably asking each other. Probably nobody out there got the nerve to walk up to me and ask, why am I going? But I'm going to tell you anyway. I want you to know. I'm going to Las Vegas because there's sin there.
Sin!
That's right, there's sin in Las Vegas, and I'm going to put a stop to it. If I can't stop it, at least I'm going to slow it down. Friends, sin runs rampant in Las Vegas. I don't care how fast it runs, I'm gonna keep up with it. I'm gonna keep up with it. I'm wearing my tennis shoes. Sin can't outrun me. And let me tell you what else I've done. I've gone to the extent of reserving a room on the 14th floor of the biggest hotel in Las Vegas. Now that room is to meditate in. That's what we're gonna be doing in the room, meditate. Do you know why? Because, friends, there are many fallen women in Las Vegas. I'm gonna pick them up. I'm gonna put them back on their feet. I'm gonna tell those feet to climb. Climb on up. To the 14th floor.
Hey, what's going on? What do you mean? But you're walking back and forth here, you're shaking your head, you're laughing. What's the problem? I don't know. I ain't got no problem. You the one with the sloppy left side. Oh, and there's one more thing. But there ain't no sense in getting into it. I mean, since you only exercising. No, please. What? Well, Max, you got no form.
I got no form. Listen, Mo. Now, I know you guys were good in your day. But since you ain't got no legs anymore, there's no reason...
What do you mean? You think we ain't got no legs? Is that what you're saying? Sandman, come in here. You know what this young man said? We ain't got no legs. That means I ain't got no legs, you ain't got no legs, and them men in there ain't got no legs. Now, what does that sound like to you?
A challenge. Now, I ain't challenged nobody.
Oh, yes, you did. Challenge!
Hey, challenge!
Challenge!
Hot damn, let's get up there and find out what
Bring in the guys. Come on in here. Go ahead, take some.
All right, go ahead.
We got a challenge.
We ain't got no legs. He challenged us.
I didn't challenge anybody.
Challenge is going on here. Make a circle. Come out here and show him, Arthur, how we get time.
Bend those legs out there. Bend them. That's it, baby. Bend them.
All right, Arthur.
Bend them.
Speed. Civil Rights, King, Van Oker, roll 20, sound 36.
Dr. King, this church is as good a place as any to go back over your commitment to the civil rights movement. When you went out from here into university and then you went to Montgomery, Alabama and started the bus boycotts there, what was the philosophy of the civil rights movement as you saw it then, more than 10 years ago?
Well, I would say then the philosophy was that we must go all out to use legal and nonviolent methods to gain full citizenship rights for the Negro people of our country. Of course, that particular struggle and that philosophy centered on breaking down all of the barriers of legal segregation. So I would say that in that period, the basic thrust for the gaining of citizenship rights for Negroes was to end the humiliation surrounding the whole system of legal segregation.
Dr. King, was there something peculiar to the place where you started and the kind of people you attracted? I mean by that, there was a strong attachment on the part of your parishioners in Montgomery to the church. They were older people, weren't they?
Yes, I would say by and large they were older people who participated in the boycott because they were the ones using the bus more than anybody else. And Montgomery was a community predominantly church-centered, so that it was very easy to get to the vast majority of Negroes because they were in some way connected with a church in the community.
Was there, in addition to your commitment to the idea of nonviolence, wasn't it also the only thing you could do, the white community having the monopoly on violence, that if you had tried violence, they would have met it with violence? It was the only device open to you, wasn't it?
Well, I'll put it another way, that morally, I was led to nonviolence because I felt that it was the best moral way to deal with the problem. We were seeking to establish a just society. And it was my feeling then, and it is my feeling now, that violence is certainly much more socially destructive, and it creates many more social problems than it solves. So I was led to nonviolence for deep moral reasons. Now, there is no doubt about the fact that in our struggle in Montgomery and all over the United States for that matter, nonviolence is also practically sound. It would just be impractical for the Negro to turn to violence. He has neither the instruments nor the techniques of violence. We are about 10 or 11% of the total population of the nation, and I would say we're about 1/10 of the firepower. So it would just be totally impractical and unwise and unrealistic for the Negro to think of violence. Well, I saw this in the beginning in Montgomery, but this wasn't the basic reason that I turned to nonviolence and that I believed in it as a philosophy. I turned to it because I felt that it was the morally excellent way to deal with the problem of racial injustice in our country.
Is there something about nonviolence that made it, and I use that in the past tense, that made it more useful among Southern Negroes than the ghetto Negroes of the North?
I wouldn't say there's anything that makes it more useful to Southern Negroes. I think it is true that we've had more nonviolent movements in the South because the problem for many years was more crystallized and, in a sense, more visible in the South. We didn't have many civil rights activities on a massive scale in the North until 3 or 4 years ago. So I would say that we just haven't had a chance to experiment on a broad scale with nonviolence in the Northern ghetto. I have the feeling that nonviolence is as applicable and workable in the Northern ghetto as it is in the South. Now, there's a larger job there. The frustrations at points are much deeper. The bitterness is deeper. And I think that's because in the South we can see pockets of progress here and there. We've really made some strides that are very visible, and every Southern Negro knows that he can do things today that he couldn't do 4 or 5 years ago. Wherein in the North, the Negro sees only retrogress, and he doesn't find it as easy to get his vision centered on his target, the target of opposition, as he does in the South. Consequently, this is made for despair and at many points cynicism, a feeling that you can't win, and it simply means that we've got to develop in the North a massive job of organization and mobilizing forces and resources to deal with the problem in the urban ghettos of the North, just as we've done it in the South.
Well, in the South, particularly in Alabama, you had visible villains: Jim Clark, Bull Connor, cattle prods, police dogs. But in the North, you don't have those visible villains. Isn't it hard to get your people aroused and directed at something that isn't visible?
Well, that's exactly right, and this is what I was saying when I said it's harder to see a target. In the South, in the nonviolent movement, we were aided always, on the whole, by the brutality of our opponent. It isn't the same way in the North. The other thing is that you don't have legal segregation in the North as you do in the South. So it is much more difficult to get people to see exactly what you're doing, but it isn't an impossible job. It's a hard, it's a tedious job at times to get people to be aroused from their apathetic slumbers, but I still feel that Negroes in the North can be motivated just as they were motivated in the South. And I think as time goes on with the growing economic deprivation in the Negro community, it will even be easier because people will come to see that not only is something wrong in general, but something is wrong in particular in their own economic and housing situations.
Well, what is it? I mean, how do you find it? It's very subtle in the North, is it not?
It's subtle, but it's becoming much more visible. Anybody can see that the schools are more segregated in the North today than they were in 1954 when the Supreme Court rendered its decision declaring segregation unconstitutional. Anybody can look around the ghetto and see that ghetto schools are predominantly segregated and devoid of quality. Anyone who moves through a major ghetto of our country will see the housing conditions. People don't have to be reminded that they are forced to live in slums in many instances, and they're often rat-infested, vermin-filled slums. And it isn't too hard to see the exploitation that the Negro confronts in the ghetto, where he is forced to pay more for less and constantly trying to make ends meet, but because of either no job as a result of unemployment or a job that is so economically unprofitable that the person can't make ends meet. And I think they see all of these things, and more they are coming to see them, because before the people of the North were looking to the South and they supported the struggles of the South. Now they are coming to see that their problems are very real and they've got organized to grapple with them.
Was there something hypocritical about the fact that the South existed and the North could point the finger, and then when the Civil Rights Acts were passed in the early 60s, you couldn't point the finger anymore?
Well, there was no doubt about the hypocrisy of large segments of the nation on the whole question of racial equality. I think the best example is that many of the senators from the North and the West, and congressmen generally, who voted for civil rights legislation in '64 and even '65 with the Voting Rights Bill, refused last year to vote for civil rights legislation because it dealt with an issue applicable to the North, the whole housing question. And this, it seems to me, was the greatest expression of the hypocrisy of many of our citizens and many of the senators and congressmen of the North.
But isn't that part of the dilemma now? That people knew that Negroes were being denied what was guaranteed to them by the Constitution, by the fact that they were citizens of this country. Then when they were given those rights, do you feel the white community said, well, we've given them all that we have, now it's up to them?
Well, I think the dilemma is much deeper, and I think one during this period of transition has to be very honest with America. And honesty impels me to admit that America has broad racist elements still alive. Racism is still existing in American society in many areas of the society, North and South. And the other thing is that there has never been a single, solid, determined commitment of large segments of white America on the whole question of racial equality. I think we have to see that vacillation has always existed, ambivalence has always existed, and this to me is the so-called white backlash. It's merely a new name for an old phenomenon. I see the white backlash as a continuation of the same ambivalence and vacillation of white America on the whole question of racial justice that has existed since the founding of our nation. I think the other thing that we must see at this time is that many of the people who supported us in Selma, in Birmingham, were really outraged about the extremist behavior toward Negroes. But they were not at that moment, and they are not now, committed to genuine equality for Negroes. It's much easier to integrate a lunch counter than it is to guarantee an annual income, for instance, to get rid of poverty for Negroes and all poor people. It's much easier to integrate a bus than it is to make genuine integration a reality and quality education a reality in our schools. It's much easier to integrate even a public park than it is to get rid of slums. And I think we are in a new era, a new phase of the struggle, where we have moved from a struggle for decency, which characterized our struggle for 10 or 12 years, to a struggle for genuine equality. And this is where we are getting the resistance, because there was never any intention to go this far. People were reacting to Bull Connor and to Jim Clark rather than acting in good faith for the realization of genuine equality.
Do you think white people in this country, and I'm talking about non-segregationists, people devoid or thinking they're devoid of racism, do you have any idea of what they want the Negro to be in America?
Well, it depends on the level that we are talking here, because I think you have to make a distinction between the people who are genuinely and absolutely committed in the white community on the question of racial equality. And I must confess that I think they're in a very small minority. I think the vast majority of white Americans will go but so far. It's a kind of installment plan for equality, and they are always looking for an excuse to go but so far.
Why are they looking for the excuse? What is it about the Negro? I mean, every other group that came as an immigrant somehow, not easily, but somehow got around it. Is it just the fact that Negroes are black?
That's a part of it, and that grows out of something else. You can't thingify anything without depersonalizing that something. If you use something as a means to an end, at that moment you make it a thing and you depersonalize it. The fact is that the Negro was a slave in this country for 244 years. That was a willful thing that was done. The Negro was brought here in chains, treated in very inhuman fashion, and this led to the thingification of the Negro. So he was not looked upon as a person. He was not looked upon as a human being with the same status and worth as other human beings. And the other thing is that human beings cannot continue to do wrong without eventually rationalizing that wrong. So slavery was justified morally, biologically, theoretically, scientifically, everything else. And it seems to me that white America must see that no other ethnic group has been a slave on American soil. That is one thing that other immigrant groups haven't had to face. The other thing is that the color became a stigma. American society made the Negro's color a stigma, and that can never be overlooked. So I think these things are absolutely necessary. The other thing is that America freed the slaves in 1863 through the Emancipation Proclamation of Abraham Lincoln, but gave the slaves no land or nothing in reality, and as a matter of fact, to get started on. At the same time, America was giving away millions of acres of land in the West and the Midwest, which meant that there was a willingness to give the white peasants from Europe an economic base. And yet it refused to give its black peasants from Africa, who came here involuntarily in chains and had worked free for 244 years, any kind of economic base. And so emancipation for the Negro was really freedom to hunger. It was freedom to the winds and rains of heaven. It was freedom without food to eat or land to cultivate, and therefore it was freedom and famine at the same time. And when white Americans tell the Negro to lift himself by his own bootstraps, they don't look over the legacy of slavery and segregation. I believe we ought to do all we can and seek to lift ourselves by our own bootstraps, but it's a cruel jest to say to a bootless man that he ought to lift himself by his own bootstraps. And many Negroes, by the thousands and millions, have been left bootless as a result of all of these years of oppression and as a result of a society that deliberately made his color a stigma and something worthless and degrading.